Just, I felt like I was going to burst into tears when
Yeah.
Wendy said that. So, yeah. Hi, Nika. Um, so I thought I would maybe open, we thought maybe we'd open by just sharing a poem. And so Danica is going to share her screen and I'm going to pull up my version of it.
Hey.
Intifada Incantation, poem number 8 for BBL. I said I loved you and I wanted genocide to stop. I said I loved you and I wanted affirmative action and reaction. I said I loved you and I wanted music out the windows. I said I loved you and I wanted nobody thirst and nobody cold. I said I loved you and I wanted justice under my nose. I said I loved you and I wanted boundaries to disappear. I wanted nobody roll back the trees. I wanted nobody take away daybreak. I wanted nobody freeze all the people on their knees. I wanted you. I wanted your kiss on the skin of my soul. And now you say you love me, and I stand, despite the trillion treacheries of sand. You say you love me, and I hold the longing of the winter in my hand. You say you love me, and I commit to friction and the undertaking of the pearl. You say you love me, you say you love me, and I begin to believe maybe you do. I am tasting myself in the mouth of the sun. Little June Jordan
Ooh.
for your Saturday lunch.
Hey,
Um, Thanks so much for being here, everybody. Hi, Danica. Uh-oh.
sweetie. I mean, hi, Melissa.
Hi.
Oh, did I
What,
freeze?
one time,
Hi.
one time, Danica visited a class of mine where I was teaching one of her books, but I didn't tell anyone that we were a couple. This is before we were married. And I can't remember actually now if you said bye, sweetie, or if you almost said bye, sweetie, and we escaped. I think you almost said bye, sweetie. Do you remember?
I think I almost said, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But now we're married, so the
I
secret's
think it
out.
was in the time before Sweetie. So it was probably bye, baby.
Oh no, it was you almost said I love you as you were signing off to
The
say bye.
secret's out. Um, no, we're so happy y'all are here, as I often do. We're so happy y'all are here. We're so happy to get to share some of June Jordan's work with you. Melissa's going to describe the structure of the workshop today, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Yeah, thanks. Your connection seems a little bit spotty, Danica, but I'll keep you updated about that.
Mhm.
I'm in Iowa City and Danica's in a hotel in Little Rock, Arkansas. So our plans sort of changed for this weekend, but we're making it work. Okay, so what we're gonna do for the next hour
I'm in
and
a
some
shabby
change
hotel in Little Rock, Arkansas.
with shabby Wi-Fi. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about this June Jordan sequence, this book that we've chosen to work from after thinking about what it would be fun to sort of meditate on and scaffold off of a little bit today. Um, and then we are going to focus in, we're going to read one poem together from the collection just to give you a sense of it. And then we are each going to share a poem and give you an exercise sort of based off of that poem. And then we're going to do Q&A and we can talk about whatever you want. And we can talk about the poems or the exercises or like literally anything you want to ask us about that we're comfortable sharing. Um, and, because there are so many of you, we are unlikely to do sharing from the exercises, but please do be active in the chat. We won't be able to monitor it, but we're going to save the transcript of the chat and we'll make sure a copy gets sent to you too, in case there's references or book recommendations or anything pops up that you want access to afterwards. Um, and I think that's about it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Danika's going to share her screen again and talk a little bit about the book that we chose.
So the book that we chose was this is this collection called love poems for Haruko, or Haruko, and then slash love poems, and it's a kind of a new and selected from the early 90s. And in the selected poem part, it's a lot of love poems by June Jordan, taken from across many of her poetry collections. And I thought one way to introduce the book is just to hear June Jordan talk about it. What she understands that the book to be doing. So I'm just gonna play this clip.
Well, a lot of people think that there's a radical contradiction between poetry and politics. And not only do you not think that, but your work really embodies sort of the fullness of all that both poetry and politics can be and how they interact with each other. Can you talk a little bit about your love poems? Because they're really, truly beautiful and extraordinary. And a lot of people can't understand how you can write these gorgeous love poems and then write these brilliant, angry, incisive, analytical, political essays.
Well, what's it all about, all the fighting? You know, what are we fighting for? I know what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for an increase in the possibilities of tenderness among us. That's what I'm fighting for. Everywhere in the world and in my private life. That's what I'm fighting for. And so, you bet, I try to give at least as much energy to my love life as I do to my war life, as I think they're the same, really. It's why I'm fighting, and it's a way of nourishing my spirit, you know, in a positive way. Love, I'm talking about, as against hatred. I don't really think that takes me anywhere I want to go. I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I think this hierarchical love poems is the first time that a major African American with a book of love poems, period. As far as I know, this is the first time. So this is, you know, African American history, and you know, we all know history is political, so but for real, this is the first time as far as I know, and I'm very proud to be putting it out here, because these are love poems about all kinds of love, romantic and familial, and there's one even about my dog, Buck.
Is there something that you'd like to read for us?
Okay, so I'll stop there. We'll come back to that. I love hearing her talk about this book. But the first part of the book, though, which is what makes it one of my favorite collections, is June Jordan's speaker, who I imagine is not very far away from June Jordan, is in the midst of a breakup and is spiraling a little bit in the breakup. She is lost in the sauce. She is a mess. And June Jordan at the time is in her mid 50s. And I also really love that. Just the messiness of the collection, the messiness of the poems. They just feel so rich and alive. And I thought Melissa and I thought we might go ahead and read one of the poems from the collection into the exercise part. So, all right. Going back to sharing again. I don't know why I stop my sharing. I just stay in the land of sharing. Okay, so this.
Sorry.
What did you say?
Sweetie, your audio is not great.
What did you say?
Your audio is cutting out quite a bit. It'll come clear for a minute and then it goes spotty. So we'll see how this goes.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me though? Like right now, is it better when it's like this, or does it not matter?
I mean, I can hear you right now.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll just see how it goes. All right. So the poem that we thought to share is 12:01 a.m. for Haruko. I wonder if for me it might be helpful if people stop sharing their screens for just a minute, or if they took the video off for just a minute. I'm sorry to do that to y'all, but I wonder if that'll help with my connection. I like seeing y'all a lot better than just your names, but
Yeah, can we try that? If folks could
yeah.
turn off your video, maybe just while
Okay.
Danika's doing her talking parts. Let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think you said you would read the first section.
Okay, yeah. Wait, so are we going back and forth, or I'm going to read this whole first section?
We're going back and forth in the first part, and then
Okay.
yeah.
Got it. Okay. 12:01 a.m. for Haruko. 1. Rushing like white waters rapid toward precipitous and killer rocks, the blood of time alone escapes control and leaking, useless, dries and quantifies the liquid loss of impulse, purified by any of your fingertips that touch my face.
2. The rain does not become a clock, does not become the rain.
3. Thinking about chocolate, I woke up and tried to move, but where you kept me, nipples and the milk of mystery bestirred the mouth of my imagination.
4. Forget about fever. Forget about healthy or unhealthy, this or that. At times, the flesh below the thin skin left a living swollen with the juice of my new destiny.
5. Then how should I subsist without the benediction of our bodies intertwined, or why?
6. Somebody else might think I mean the epiderm, the tissues, and the cells that matter into tangible configurations only.
7. I am my soul adrift. The whole night sky denies me light without you.
Why I became a pacifist and then how I became a warrior again. Because nothing I could do or say turned out okay. I figured I should just sit still and chill, except to maybe mumble, baby, baby, stop. And because turning that other cheek, holding my tongue, refusing to retaliate when the deal got ugly, and because not throwing whoever calls me a bitch out the goddamn window, and because swallowing my pride, saying I'm sorry when whoever don't like one single thing about me and don't never take a break from counting up the 65,899 ways I talk wrong, I act wrong, and because sitting on my fist, neglecting to enumerate every incoherent, rigid, raggedy ass, disrespectful, killer cold, and self infatuated crime against love committed by some loudmouth, don't know nothing about it, takes 2 to fuck, and it takes 2 to fuck things up. And because making apologies that nobody give a shit about, and because failing to sing my song finally got on my absolute last nerve, I pick up my sword, I lift my shield, and I stay ready for war, because now I live ready for a whole lot more than that.
Clean. You spelled out make it, break it, clean. But you meant mean, as in mean, hard, gone, like how you done me. Mean, hard, gone, hard, done. Oh God. It made me
Whoa.
sweaty. It made me a little sweaty in my armpits.
Ah, I feel like this is a great poem that just demonstrates exactly what Jordan is describing. It's like there's the her in love and there's her at war, and they're right alongside each other. But there's also her in the face of this breakup,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all mixed up. It's all mixed up. Everything's all happening at the same time. We live our lives alongside. And it's one of the magnificent things about this poem. We were actually talking before we were talking about what we were going to read, and we couldn't decide if it would be like, were we just going to read the first section? Was it all one poem? It felt a little bit confusing. But I do think, the title of that poem is 12:01 a.m. for Haruko.
Yeah, it's just all in there. There's a poem in this collection that's like, what is it? It's like texts from Haruko or responses from Haruko, and it's just
Mhm.
no, no, no.
Haruko is like, stop leaving me messages.
She said,
Get off my
please,
answer.
it's over. June, go write a poem. In that, when I read Intifada Incantation, and she said, I want to dissolve all boundaries in my head as I was reading it, I thought, not all boundaries, June, not all. The bad ones.
But it is just, I think one of the things that's amazing about this poem or about this collection is I think June Jordan is making this argument. She's making a claim that like alongside the political poems, which I believe are what she is most known for, she has all of these love poems. That all of these, like they're not separate from each other.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably time for us to move into the next thing. So we're gonna do a little bit of writing together. I'm gonna get us started off. Um, and okay, just make sure all that's good. Okay, so I'm gonna read a poem from this part of the collection, and Melissa and I will maybe talk a little bit about it, just some things that we noticed that might be useful, and then we'll write for about 10 minutes together. All right, Melissa's the host now. Oh, all right. So I'm taking us to page. So this is the poem Melissa was talking about. Taiko Dojo messages from Haruko. She said, please stop. So the poem that I'll have us looking at today is titled Postscript for Haruko on War and Peace. And is my audio still okay? Has it been doing better? Okay. So postscript for Haruko on War and Peace. How still these oak and maple trees stand side by side in slowly melting snow. Not one attacks or seeks incineration for the other. Not even mysteries of birds that miss the last sure flight to safety interject disturbance of this winter night when patience seems as natural as the cold air holding all that's there, serene and lifted by a star's light, as specific in its glitter as it's far. So do we finally outlive the flare and flash of flame and leaf and feathers violent as waves that rise because they also fall away and falling call the waters of the world one name again? So do we finally recover side by side what we have loved enough to keep in spite of passion or love's sorrow? Haruko. Oh, it's like string bean in French. No, it's like hurricane in English. The ending, the two endings of this poem, I love so much. Uh, I I picked this poem because I like it. It speaks to me in terms of the long gaze, the long arc of something, what we can turn to when maybe the world doesn't make a lot of sense. And in this poem, she's turning to the trees, the oak and the maple. She's thinking about the mysteries of birds, leaves falling. And there's violence in that, the flare and the flash and the flame. But there are also the waves that rise because they also fall away and falling, call the waters of the world one name again. Like there's something about the natural world that provides a kind of solace and a kind of model for having a different measure of experience or understanding human experience. And I love just the concreteness of it. I think I'll pause there. Melissa, you were going to say something?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say something, but then I got distracted just listening to you. I guess I wanted to know if you had thoughts about that second ending. with the string bean and hurricane, because I feel like it's a little bit confounding, but also I feel so moved by no, it's like hurricane in English, like really has an impact, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And then I also just, you know, this comes late in this series, and so do we finally recover side by side what we have loved enough to keep in spite of passion or love sorrow? And I love that. And I'm just thinking about what she said in the recording about increasing the possibilities for tenderness, and how
Mm-hmm.
in this book there's so much, like, I don't know, when I read it I think, "Oh my God, this is such an embarrassing book." Um, but it's so, she just, there is such value in putting it all in, and by transcribing her grief and her anger and moving through, this seems to sort of articulate in some ways the project of it about recovering what she has loved enough to keep in spite of sorrow, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
increasing the possibilities for tenderness means putting the embarrassing, sad parts on the page and, you know, at the foreground of our
Mm-hmm.
content.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thought that I have about the second ending is she wants us to know how to say Haruko's name,
Mm,
right? Like it's not like Haruko Vare. That's my
yeah.
sort of anglicized French.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like hurricane, right? Haruko, right?
Miracle.
She's
Yeah, yeah,
giving us both a model, but then like also it feels like maybe this is how Haruko felt in her life, like
yeah.
in the speaker's life. And I really, I mean, I find that moving for a lot of reasons. I have a name that I say differently from my parents, and also differently from a lot of people. Like my the correct pronunciation of my name as I say it is Danica. A lot of people say Donica. My parents and also my therapist say Danica, which you know is all that's fine, but I say Danica. And so it does feel like this is a moment. Like when I think about how I say my name, it's like my sister's name. It's Danica, like Danita.
Yeah.
Like like that's the unit, Danica and Danita. And I like that Jordan takes this moment here to say, no, this is how you say this name that maybe you've been mispronouncing this entire time.
Wow.
Um,
I love
yeah,
that.
and I love what you said too about the end of maybe like the first ending, that tenderness. I think who is the we,
Mm-hmm.
right? So do we, right? Like the speaker, Jordan, is not alone. And I don't think anyone, any figure in this poem, any being in this poem is alone. It's like the oak and the maple trees are standing side by side. The birds may have missed a last sure flight to safety, but it's more than one bird, right? Um, the waves are not singular. And I think that there's something about that alongsideness, that withness, that feels pretty important, pretty significant for this poem. Um, so let me see what I have here. Um, all right, so I'm gonna try to put this in here. Uh, maybe I'll stop doing this. I love it. I just remember all the student critiques of like faculty being like, "Oh, I'm gonna stop sharing." We can't help it. I'm a narrator. Um, so I have an exercise, and I want you to approach this in whatever form makes the most sense for you. It can be a poem, it can be a free write, it can be, um, gesturing in some way towards a little bit of nonfiction. Um, and for the questions that I have, I really want you to think about some of the things that Jordan is taking up. So what outside of the human shows us that there are different ways to be in the world? So here, you know, she turns to the birds, she turns to the oaks, she turns to the waves. Um, which season gives you the most room to wonder, to contemplate? What do you hope to outlive? Who will be with you? And just include putting as many concrete descriptive details as possible in the next 10 minutes to start something. Uh, and yeah, so that's the prompt, is just to really try to engage in these questions in the form that feels right for you today.
And just to let you all know, it's in those questions are all in the chat right now.
Oh, I forgot to say I dropped them in the chat. That's also the other thing that we used to say. Let's just take about one more minute. I head into a good place to stop. All right. Um,
All right. Are we ready? Um, do you want to share your screen again, Danica? Is there anything else you want to say before we move on?
the only other thing I might want to say is I had one more question, but I had taken it off, and it was, how would you teach someone to say their name, right? The name of who you would want to be with. So maybe you want to make that note for later to put down a tale to return to. All right, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. So I'm going to lead us in another exercise, and I want to sort of work off of this poem on the right-hand side on 23. And maybe hold on a sec. I'm going to put a link to it so that folks can have their own copy or look at a slightly bigger copy. I'm going to put that in the chat, and I'm just going to read this poem for Haruko. All day I did things fast, picking up leaves, scrubbing a saucepan clean, racing through an Asian American anthology of poems. All because it hurt so much to think about you hurt. Because I moved so slowly and in circles, seemingly insensible to how you held a towel, wide as your slender arms are long, to fold around me, shivering from the bathtub, how you held a children's story close to my almost closing eyelids, how you held me free as I could ever hope to be. Um,
Hmm, so
Beautiful.
good. So good.
And to me, I just, this just evoked a particular experience of memory and missing, and the ways that when we're moving about the very specific, concrete, mundane parts of our day, how we can get possessed by a memory, right? And how a happy memory can just sort of gut us, and not wholly in a negative way. Maybe that wasn't the right um verb to use, but
Mm,
overtake can overtake
mhm,
us, and
mhm,
to me to be like just an indelible part of any big breakup, right? When you're sort of moving through it and you're not thinking about it all the time, and you're scrubbing your dish and you're reading your anthology, and then oh, there it is,
mhm,
and it just carries you away for a few minutes, and then you're left with a feeling of like sweetness and sorrow that you got to experience
mhm,
something that you're not experiencing anymore. um
mhm,
and just that image of the lover holding out a towel and encircling the speaker in it, and And then the idea of them, I mean, I picture them reading together and Haruko reading the speaker to sleep, right? And sort of hold,
Hmm.
like they're both on their backs, or maybe the speaker's lying on the lever and holding the book so that it's sort of over their faces and falling asleep. Um, and then this final idea of being held as the greatest freedom, right? To be encircled in loving arms, be as free as she could ever hope to be, you know. Um, and again, it makes me think of, you know,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that recording and just increasing the possibilities for tenderness, right? And sort of,
Hmm.
I don't know, making space for those memories, giving oneself to remembering that freedom, even though it isn't anymore, you know, or maybe it always is once you've experienced it. I don't know.
I had a thought related to that too, um, which is that there's also being taken care of,
Mhm,
being tended to, being like coming out of the bath, being dried off, being read to. That's a specific kind of safety, and maybe one we don't know to long for when we're adults and when we're in middle age. That we can't know that we will experience that again. Maybe we've never experienced it. And so I'm not saying that for the speaker, but I'm just thinking about how moving she finds this tenderness. And I'm also really struck by the telling in this poem. I think we're
mhm,
often given advice to show and not tell, but the
mhm,
telling here is doing so much work.
mhm,
And it happens right in, like, kind of in the middle of the poem, all because it hurts so much to think about you hurt.
mhm,
That's what's happening in the poem. It's just like to that thinking, right? Remembering that, like, what the feeling is. Um,
mhm.
so I just wanted to highlight those things.
Yeah, and this way of, sort of, you know, all day I did things fast, like her, like I just picture picking up leaves, like raking the yard, scrubbing the ditch, trying to scrub away, get away from the feeling, right? Trying to get away from picturing that hurt, um, and kind of moving in circles, and you know that the insensibility of being in the wake of something. So I thought for our exercise, we might emulate that movement from the concrete movement of a day, specifically maybe this morning. Um, and what I'm going to do, and you can, I always like to make a little list before I write. So you're welcome to do this. You can skip over it if you want, but to make a couple of notes or write down a couple of concrete details of just stuff you did this morning. You know, it doesn't have to be poetic. It could just be like the specific book that you were reading or the thing that you were cleaning or picking up, and maybe the quality of your motion. And then, and we might want to think about this also ahead of time, to think about a memory of something you've experienced that you're not experiencing anymore. You know, ideally, maybe a memory of tenderness or sweetness, of being held, but you can go with wherever your heart is today. And move from sort of a couple of concrete details and something qualifying the motion of this morning, and then segue into that memory, sort of however those two might feel connected to you. And we'll take about another 10 minutes to do that, and I'll drop some instructions in the chat that you can refer to. And take one more minute. And just finish up your thought. So glad I got to do some describing today because I woke up and everything in Iowa is covered in ice. We had like rain and a freeze last night. So the whole time we've been teaching this class, I keep thinking I hear like a knock, but it's actually the tree in our front yard moving in the wind and its little coating of ice cracking. So I can't make this shit out. Um, so I think we are done writing and ready to move into a little Q&A. And Danica, do you want to try to turn your camera on and just see how it goes?
Sure, sure.
And if it messes up your audio, then you can turn it back off again. But we're happy to talk about whatever. We can talk about anything that we've done here today, or writing nonfiction and poetry, or what kind of candy we like and what kind of dogs we like.
The answer to the dog question is yes.
Yeah. So if folks want to digitally raise your hand, we can call on you. Isabella.
Yeah, I just wanted to really thank you. The poems that you brought to the table were really touched me really deeply, and gave me, for some reason, gave me permission to write two poems that I would have that I haven't written before. Well, of course I haven't written them before, but it gave me permission to not write a beautiful poem.
Mm,
I just want to thank you for that.
mhm,
I love that. Thank you so much, Isabella. I'm so
mhm.
glad.
Yeah. I think there is something about June Jordan's work that feels so much freer. There's the constraint of poetry, obviously, in the language and the line, but her poems feel so much more energetic. They're just like they're full. They feel so full. And so I'm glad you were able to take that invitation, Isabella.
Eva?
Yeah. Hi. First of all, I just want to thank you both so much for your workshop and for your work in general. Like, you both are authors I keep coming back to learn from and just get inspired by. For my question, as a new mom and a not so new reproductive justice activist, I find myself frequently coming back to really similar themes in my work of womanhood and ownership of bodies. And that sometimes makes me feel stale and like I don't necessarily have enough to say to like share my writing or submit for publication and stuff. So I was wondering if either of you ever comes to that feeling in your own writing, and if you do, how you kind of push past it to keep writing and sharing your work with the world.
Yeah. I can say that I definitely have had this concern with my work, and in my, like, I don't know, 16 or 17 or 18 years of teaching, I've heard it like an infinite number of times. Because I think the fantasy is that we're going, when we feel driven to write about something and we delve into it and spend some time, I've written whole books on subjects and not realized until afterwards that I had the fantasy that I would never have to write about it or think about it ever again if I just wrote a whole book. And it has never been true. For better and worse, mostly for better, I think, like, we have our obsessions. And if the creative spirit in you is telling you to write about it, like, your work isn't done, you know? And I've tried to resist that. I've tried to fight it. I've tried to avoid it. It does not work. It does not work. And sometimes I have to wait until I'm ready, or like educate myself more or whatever, find the right form. But most of the time I just have to, the stuff I want to write about, I'm obsessive. And my obsessions are not dispatched with in one 300-page book. Usually it's they end up recurring kind of forever also, because obsessions evolve as my person evolves. And so it was interesting to hear you say, I don't have enough to say about it, because it sounded very clear to me in your question that you had a drive to write about it, which means that you do have something to say about it. So that statement, I don't have enough to say about it, is maybe imagining what other people are going to say, or that someone is going to judge you and be like, there she goes again, or whatever. And even if they are, that's none of your business. Like, sometimes I start writing and similar things come up that I've written about in the past, and a little part of me is like, oh no, that bad faith reader out there is going to be like, there she goes again, banging the drum about masturbation or sex work or whatever. And there's just no getting around it. That's none of my business. And mostly I try to push that voice aside and remember my ideal reader, the person who most needs the thing that I'm writing for, and they don't need to hear it one time. Like, reproductive justice is something we need to be talking about until we don't anymore. And sadly, we're very far away from that point.
Allow me to also add, like, just alongside what Melissa's saying, because I agree with everything she said. If you feel like you've boxed yourself in, because I do think that can happen. Sometimes we feel like, oh, I can only write about this, or everything that I'm writing needs to go in this direction. I'm hoping that the poems today have shown you that, like, there's a lot that can happen alongside, right? So June Jordan has poems and essays that are really thinking about, like, these large political structures and practices. And then here we have just like a mess of breakup poems, and she's doing that at the same time, right? Or like in the interview that I believe the link is in the chat. One of the things that she says is there are love poems to her dogs. Like, there are lots of different kinds of things that you can be writing about, and writing about, like, the smaller parts of life, the more intimate, the more mundane parts of life doesn't invalidate, or isn't, like, less important than writing about the big things, right? What feels like the big social questions and challenges that we're facing right now. So I just want to add to that, you can write the little things too.
That's so great.
Uh, Danu? I'm probably saying that so wrong. Sorry.
That's okay. It's Danu. Thank you both. This was amazing. To spend a Saturday with my cat listening to this, like, I live a perfect life. The question I have for both of you, there's a lot floating in my mind. Thinking about how we, like, are grieving Nikki Giovanni. I was wondering if there is a piece of her work that you return to, or in particular you've been sitting with. And along that line, well, they're actually separate questions. I'm an outside thinker. Um, when you're in a writing rut, or like you're not able to kind of like get to the page, what are some rituals or texts you return to? Thanks.
Um, There's a Nikki Giovanni poem that I return to, but I can't remember the title right now, which feels embarrassing. But there's her interview with Baldwin, like her conversation with James Baldwin is, and the whole thing is on YouTube. I would highly recommend it. She's young. She's maybe like 28, 20, like she's in her like late 20s, and Baldwin's in his late 40s, and she does not let him off the hook. And every time I've seen it, I'm just like, yes, yes. Just like, how do you show up and say, I need you to show up too? Because Baldwin was doing the thing that Baldwin does, which is he sort of had things that he said all the time, or I don't want to say it was like pat, but like at one point in that conversation, he repeats almost verbatim the first part of an essay in talking with her, and it doesn't work because she's not a white man. She's like, you gotta do something a little bit different. And I think he eventually does take up that invitation. Um, but it just like the fearlessness, Nikki Giovanni's fearlessness, and like, I don't know, and it wasn't cruel, it was just, she was like, hey, we're here together, let's be here together. And that's a moment with Nikki Giovanni that I return to again and again. Um, and I really do find like when I'm sort of stuck, there are poets who I return to. Um, Lucille Clifton these days is a really big one. Um, her work is, she has this poem called Kent State. Um, it's it's amazing. And then there's a poem by her that's pretty famous. It's like maybe one of her more famous works, Won't You Celebrate With Me? And I've been sharing that a lot with students this semester. I'm like, we're here. We're making a life somehow out of this. Oh yes, the Going to Mars documentary. That's right. That's also available. I haven't gotten to see it yet, but it's in my queue. Phoebos, what are you? Who do you return to?
Um, when I get into a rut, um, I think I just like, I would more have the problem of like feeling like I'm gonna die before I can write all the things I want to write. So it's more like I would say the things that I get into are not writing ruts, like not a writer's block situation, but when I get a little bit painted into a corner with my perfectionism, and I feel, which I think is actually tantamount to writer's block, because that's sort of what writer's block is just fear and perfectionism. And sometimes I can forget that anything is possible in art, and that I don't have to sort of structure or map out every single thing. And so I tend to return to writers who are a bit weird. And I guess that doesn't even necessarily mean like what we would think of as um, experimental right now. I'm actually thinking of like Morrison and Baldwin, who are both like, the longer I live and the more I return to them, the more experimental they feel. Like I'm like, people are writing today and they're being like, look at these experimental prose. And I'm like, this is just this is just literary art. What are you talking about? But like people who are writing long, crazy, beautiful sentences and combining sort of lyric stuff with very straightforward stuff. I mean, poetry does it a lot. And I don't know. I think I returned to Joanne Beard, an essayist who was one of my teachers in grad school. Um, Yeah, it's more like there's like a PDF, there's a folder in my computer of PDFs that I like to teach from, and there's like a small collection of essays in there that no matter how many times I reread them, they never fail to sort of blow the roof off my mind, to just be like, oh, right. Like it doesn't have to, there's not just one way to do that to make somebody feel something, you know? And pieces that are sort of going back to Eva's question about really sort of ordinary experiences that will just um, rip your seams open, you know? Just to remind myself that that's the job. It's not finding something new to write about. It's writing about it with my whole heart, you know. A Roach.
Hi. I want to echo everything that everybody has said in terms of thank you for hosting this, and thank you also for making the space for so much of June Jordan's work. And one of the things that I really appreciate about her is, I think the last exercise we did was a really good example of this, how she's very able to kind of like drill into a poem she's writing about, like waiting for the subway, or she's writing about like a very immediate experience, and she's able to kind of like zoom out. And this kind of gives me the feeling like all of her work was sort of written all at once. Like all of her poems, I always feel like, oh, you're sitting at a coffee table, you know, drinking, like eating breakfast, whatever. And you just like wrote this poem as it is, like in my brain. That's what's happening. I know this is probably not true. But I think like I've been a writer for a long time, but I only recently started writing poetry, and finding June Jordan's work for me was very like, oh, I can do this. We can actually do these bite-sized poems. It doesn't like, you know, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to have like a rhyming scheme, etc. Anyways, that's all to build up to a real question and not a comment, which is like, how do you know when a poem is done? Because sometimes I feel like I will write something and I'm kind of like, there's something, it's not quite done, but I don't know how to fix it. Or other times I'm like, I think this is done, maybe, but I can't really tell. And obviously nobody else can tell me. So how do you know when a poem is done? And how can you tell that difference between like, you know, inspiration in the moment and you're writing about the flower that you saw in your work versus like that longer time of refining versus like perfectionism? I hope that was coherent. I'm done now. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you. I think this is a really, you sort of answered part of it, which is that no one can tell you. Like you have to develop a sense of when something is in its fullest form, right? And I think approaching work as something that needs to be fixed can actually inhibit that a little bit, like coming to it as like, I know something's wrong and I need to fix it, versus where I've gotten to at this point with my writing, I'm asking the poem what it wants to do. So then is the poem in its fullest shape? Is it doing what it wants to do? And I remember I was probably like 10 years into my writing practice. So it was like post MFA, it was like post undergrad, post MFA. And I had been in a place where like finally I had enough poems that I could see what I liked to do and what I thought was good. So part of this is also, I think, a question of volume. Like, do you have enough work to understand what it is that you do and what you like to do? You think about who you read. Are you doing the things that you like to read? Like, are your poems enjoyable to you? For me, like, that's such a big question. It's like, do I enjoy my work? Am I delighted by this? Do I want to return to it? And what are the things that make me want to return to a poem? So, like with the June Jordan poem that I chose, there's that whole part, the second stanza, where it's just like it does feel like a wave. You know, it's like I was just like, oh, 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 like reading. There's no punctuation. It's just like it builds and it builds and it builds. And I really like that. That's a move that I enjoy very much. So can I do that in my work? Right? Can I think about how I might create a similar feeling in my work, which is less about thinking about the poem as a product and more like the process and the practice. Like, can I make it something I want to return to? So it's not, for me, it's like not a nuts and bolts answer, because like as you said, you got to kind of figure out like what feels good to you. But if you know something's going on in a poem and you don't know how to address it, you don't know what to do. You know something feels off, but you don't know what to do about it. I think that's a sure sign to just leave it alone and come back to it. Come back to it in 6 months, come back to it in a year. People used to tell me that all the time when I was a young person and I hated it. And now I'm like, that's right. You put it in a drawer. Everyone always talked about putting things in a drawer. It's like, what is this drawer? And it's a file labeled whatever the year is that the poem was written. That's my drawer. I just put it in there. So I'm like, I'll look at this later. We'll see if there's something in there. And then periodically go look in the drawer. That's my like biggest advice. Just like go look at it from time to time. And you'll find over time, if you continue writing and reading, that there's just more that will, like, you'll be able to address things. Things will be clearer to you. Like how to make something more fully itself. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I do.
I think that makes perfect sense. And, I don't write poems, but I still relate
Not anymore.
more. But I still related to that where a lot of times, and this is like, you said that writing poetry was somewhat new to you. And like, I don't know, my guess is that you probably haven't finished anything, like it takes a really long time to develop an ear in a new set of skills to get to a point where you can really say it's finished and that it's doing what you want. And something that I say to my students a lot is like, do you know what the thing you're making, what you want it to be? Do you know how to make something that does that? Now measure it against that, right? Because sometimes I think it's all just vibes and we're not quite sure and we don't quite have a vision, or we don't yet have the tools to make what's inside of us outside of us. And that's okay. Sometimes I just have to wait until I'm a better writer, or until I have more insight into what I'm writing about. And the one last thing I will add to this, and this is really for the memoirists, I don't know if it translates to poetry, but for me, because I am often writing directly about experience, this bar has emerged in my work that usually I'm not done writing something unless my relationship to it has been changed in some way by the writing. Like, has something been revealed that I didn't know before about that experience? Has my understanding of it deepened or sharpened in some way? And if that's not yet true, then I'm not done. Ari?
Yeah, hi. Thanks you both so much again. I feel like the answer to my question I'm about to ask is kind of contained in June Jordan's body of work, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you think, like, what is your kind of approach to poetics of writing liberatory things without like making them, I guess, feel like vivid and making them feel true, without making them so explicit in the way of another genre would approach this, or something that's more explicatory. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, what are your approaches like into like the truth of feeling of liberation, in a world where I think sometimes writing that like means really well in this sometimes doesn't resonate, I think, as well as it could if it were, by kind of like, ironically going back to identity and really being explicit in certain ways. I think it undoes itself, by not kind of like being more expansive, or is this making sense? Like, I think I'm trying to like ask also, like, how do you bring in like a sense of deep connection to like relating to a reader by sticking to this like the goal of being liberatory in your writing while not like, I guess, going into a sort of more explicit like beat you over the head with like the unjustness of the world, which like we all feel, I think, and know to be true. Like, how do you come back to making that feel like a poetic endeavor as opposed to another kind of communication?
Mhm. There are a number of poets. I'm thinking maybe specifically of Hanif right now, Abdurraqib. But there are a number of poets who've written poems that essentially are asking the questions of like, Evie Shockley does this. Um, it's like, can I write about flowers? Right? I'm a Black person. Does every poem have to be about racism? Right? And the answer is no. Right? And I think that, I mean, I talk about this a lot with my students in terms of writing out of identity and thinking about what we imagine a reader is owed, or what it will mean, what we need to do for someone to read our work, or what we imagine we need to do, how we need to talk about ourselves or write about ourselves. Yeah, I think Katie put this, yes, writing about flowers in a time like this. Um, my question is, am I living a life? Maybe it's not liberatory. I'm American, so like I don't know. It doesn't really. I don't know how far is that. I don't know. It feels tricky. But am I living a life that reflects my values And then can that come into my work? And can I care about myself, which for whatever reason these days feels like to care about oneself, to not bear everything, to have boundaries. I think there is something about that um, is much more irregular than I think it ought to be, right? So it's like, can I take care of myself? Can I take care of my speaker? And then model for my reader that tenderness, right? To me, that feels like where my work is. And I can't tell anyone else how to do their work. I can't tell anyone else what their work is. But sometimes people say, like, they're surprised about me being Black or something. And like, I read about birds. There's a lot of birds and a lot of nature. And I'm like, all of these are Black poems. All of these are queer poems. Like, they are because I wrote them. So there isn't, it, for me, it doesn't need to be, I'm not stating anything explicitly because I'm writing out of what I know. And what I know is pretty small, and what I can control is pretty tiny. So, I don't know. I think lots of people approach this differently. And I think maybe finding the writers who do what you love and looking for who they've influenced, who's in their lineage, who are they writing out of, is also like a really wonderful way to investigate that more fully. Because I get the sense, Ari, that you know what you like. You know exactly what you're talking about. And you want to see more of it, and there's more of it out there because there's so many different kinds of writers writing. And for those people who are more explicit or who are maybe just now sort of coming into understanding about something, that work is important too. That work is also very vital, even if it doesn't resonate with everyone, I guess. I don't know, sweetie, is there something else you wanted to say?
No, I thought that was really astute. Liberation is a capacious concept, and I think it's we want to communicate different things when we're writing about it, and so, yeah, I'm just going to keep reiterating what Danica said, but just, write the poem that you want to see in the world, Ari, whatever that is. And the way I figure out how to make the work that I think is doing the work is by imitating the people who are doing it, and my own voice has emerged out of that practice, Rhea, correct me if I'm saying your name wrong.
And I think this has to be the last question. I have a hard stop at 1:30. I'm sorry. So
yeah, thank you both so much. This has been great. Yeah, really happy to be here. I guess I loved what you both said about how to tell when a poem is done. And I have just been thinking a lot about practices of revision in my own work. And I'm wondering if, you have any practices, whether they're like concrete or more like esoteric type of things that help you like listen for what a piece is wanting to do, when you're not quite there yet, or it's not fully itself yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will definitely say that what Danica said earlier about time is the most important ingredient. I think when people are struggling with revision, and maybe what I also said too a couple questions ago, when we're struggling with revision, when I'm struggling, when I see other people struggling, a lot of the time it's that we haven't taken space away from it to be able to see it clearly. We haven't waited long enough. Or we just don't know enough yet, right? Or the space between what we are capable of and the thing we have written and the thing we want, like we just simply don't have the skill yet. And so this is just kind of a blanket statement, like it's okay if that's true. It's why I don't grade my undergrad's revisions, like, because they don't have the tools yet to be able to really successfully revise. It's all just practicing, right? But when I do, I get really pragmatic in my revisions. Like the first draft is where I'm like, what are my instincts? I'm following instincts. Maybe I have an outline, but I'm just like getting it all out there, surprising myself. Revision is like I get my little compass and rulers out, like so to speak. And I really think, what am I trying to do here? And I'm pragmatic like that because I'm an overwriter. Everything goes too long. I just want to put the whole world in every single thing I write, and I can't do that. So I need to be very explicit with myself about what my goals are for a particular piece of writing, and really let go of the rest and not just keep things tucked in there because I like them or because they're meaningful. Like everything, every part needs to serve the whole, right? And so I think being really clear in my vision is super clarifying for the rest of it. You know, like what do I want to make and what elements are going to make this that? And then go through and take the rest out and sharpen all of those. Do you want to add anything in 1 minute, Danica?
I just think time. I hate it. But I just think it's like time is just one of the most helpful. When I was younger, when I was earlier in my writing process, I was in a hurry, and writing is not served. This practice is not served by being in a hurry, I don't think. And I think, imagining it not as a product is also really helpful. I think that frees it up, if at least for me. Like I'm not focused on the poem. I'm like, I like writing poems. I like making work. That feels really good. It doesn't have to be good for anyone else. So, y'all, thank you so much. This was so wonderful and nourishing. Thank you, sweetie, for being a fantastic teacher. I'm stealing your prompt. I'm stealing your prompt. Consider it stolen.
Thank you, sweetie. Hey, if folks want to turn your cameras on so I can take a little group picture of us. Let's do it. Let me make you full screen. And we will send you the chat. And this has just been amazing. Thank you all so much. This was really, really sweet. I can't believe we raised $7,000. I'm super thrilled about it. Thank you for doing that with us. Okay, smile. Yay! Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.